Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my Legion Discipline guide. This one is going to be all about setting up your character. That means gearing, stats, talents, macros, all that fun stuff. So we're just going to jump right into it. I highly recommend you use macros when playing Disc, just because the UI does not support uh, casting on enemies and casting on friendlies very well. You can also use something like Click or Voodoo or add-ons like that. I prefer just simple mouse over macros myself. And you can just use this macro text here. It's cast at mouse over, no dead, help, brackets. I also have my guide linked at the bottom of the video in the description that you can get the actual text from if you just want to copy paste. But basically what this does is this will cast a helpful spell at whoever my mouse is over. Your mouse is over someone when the little tooltip shows up. It's annoying. So we'll kind of cast on this guy right here. And so you can see I'm healing this NPC. I don't have it targeted or anything, and I'm healing him. It will also cast at a target if your target is friendly. But if you have your mouse over another target and you have a target at friendly, it'll cast at the mouse over instead. And then if you don't have either of those, it'll just cast on yourself. So that's kind of nice. I just macro that into all of my helpful spells. It's Plea, Power Word Shield, Shadow Men, Power Word Radiance. You can even do it for things like Dispels or Pain Suppression, stuff like that. That's all nice. But it basically makes it so you're not like clicking back and forth between different mobs and between allies and enemies and everything like that. You just put on your macro and then you just keep the enemy targeted the whole time, and then you heal people like by mousing over on your raid frame or party frame, instead of just constantly switching targets, which gets very tedious and very difficult. So that's some pretty simple stuff. We're also going to talk about talents real quick. This is not going to be very complicated. I'm just going to tell you to ignore some of these talents, frankly, and you're just going to kind of have to believe me, because I don't really want to go into why some of these are kind of bad to begin with. So we'll just go through these real quick. The Penitent on this first row allows your penance to heal friendlies. It doesn't do more healing than Shadow Mend, so you might as well just Shadow Mend and just not use this thing. Castigation makes penance just better when you're casting it on enemies, which is kind of nice. Schism is an entirely separate ability that powers up your other abilities on the target you use it on, but it does cost quite a lot of mana, and it's very difficult to work into the rotation. It's not bad as much as it's not quite worth using for its hassle. It's very difficult to end up in a situation where actually using Schism is better off than just taking Castigation and using other spells instead of Schism. On our second row here, you pretty much need Feathers to exist in the game. Otherwise, you have just no movement speed increase whatsoever. Body and Soul is kind of bad because there's a cooldown on Power Word Shield now. Masochism makes that dot on Shadow Mend. Instead of you getting a dot when you cast it on yourself, it instead gives you a hot. It's really great in PvP. In PvE, though, if you just don't have Feathers, you're just going to end up taking more damage and probably dying. So just take Feathers for PvE. Next one, this tier is basically irrelevant. Not going to talk about it. You can read it yourself. The one after that, currently Mindbender is just better than the other options. Same old Mindbender as always, turns your Shadow Fiend into a faster, smaller, quicker cooldown. And it's just better at the moment than Solace numerically. And even if that changes, I think I would prefer Mindbender, because Solace is kind of awkward to fit in this demand that you must cast it like every 9 or 10 seconds. We already have Penance and Power Word Shield that are kind of in that category, and it's much like Schism, it's a little awkward to just fit another ability in there on cooldown. And it ends up sitting off cooldown for a few seconds, and that just makes it not quite very good. And then Shield Discipline is just kind of bad right now. It would need buffs to be pretty good. The talent row after that, Contrition. A lot of people take Contrition thinking that it'll make playing the game easier. That's not actually really true. 2 seconds longer on Atone is not a lot. and it's actually kind of useless in 5-mans because you're always using Power Word Shield and Shadow Mend anyway to put Atonement on people, and you're not going to go, like 17 seconds without healing someone again that still needs healing. And in raids, it's kind of nice, but it doesn't really compete with the other options here. So the other options here are Power Infusion, which is just a cooldown, ton of extra haste, and cheaper spells during it. You just use it, and it's just a nice healing cooldown. We don't really have good cooldowns that just make you do more healing, and Power Infusion kind of fills that gap. And it doesn't have any conditions or anything like that. You just use it whenever you want, basically. And the 20-second duration is quite nice because it gives you enough time to get whatever done is that you needed to do. We also have Twist of Fate, which works kind of the same way it always did. It's still only if you heal a target below 35%, which it goes between either by far the best talent in a row or just kind of useless, depending on what content you're doing. If you're doing like mythic raids or high-level mythic dungeons, Twisted Fate can be very good in the right circumstances. But if you're doing something like normal or heroic raids or normal or heroic dungeons, it's probably pretty terrible. And then there's some kind of in between where it's kind of good but not quite as good as Power Infusion. You just kind of have to use your judgment for how often it's up, as to whether it's a good talent or not. It totally changes depending on the situation. Next row we have Halo and Divine Star. Both of these abilities do damage once again. They do damage to everything they hit, but only the first thing that they hit that does damage will actually be atonement healing. So you don't get to Halo into 20 mobs and then burst everyone back up to full health because of all that atonement healing. No, it'll only count for one mob, but it's still pretty good. It's pretty efficient, does a lot of damage, does a lot of healing also, and same with Divine Star, but with the same stipulation on Divine Star as always that people need to be kind of grouped up and close together. Clarity of Will is just terrible. It's worse than just using Shadow Mend. Just use Shadow Mend if you wanted to use something for Clarity of Will. If you really need tank healing, just use Shadow Mend instead. It's just better, and you don't miss out on something like Halo for group healing. Like, would you rather heal the tank for the same amount and then have to actually heal your group members when they take damage, or would you rather just use Shadow Mend and then use Halo when they take damage? Seems pretty obvious. The final tier is some really confusing and awkward talents. Purge the Wicked just replaces Shadow Word Pain. It makes it do a very slightly amount of more damage and cost a little bit less mana. So it does do something when there's only one target, but the real big part of Purge the Wicked is that if you penance someone that has Purge the Wicked on them, I need to find two mobs like close to each other to show you. But basically, it'll jump the penance from one mob to another, and it'll just copy it over. So you'll penance or you'll purge the Wicked 2 targets for the price of 1, which makes it really nice in any situation where you can do that. All these mobs are dying too fast around Dalaran for that though. We also have Grace. Grace just makes your non-atonement heals do 30% more on targets that have atonement. And the long story short is that it makes Shadow Mend heal for a lot more. And that's just, it's an absolutely amazing talent for 5-mans. There's really no other way to say it. So here we're gonna do this one. Purge the Wicked and penance, and now this mob is Purge the Wicked as well. Okay, Purge the Wicked, and I only cast it once. So yeah, Grace, very good for 5-mans. Wouldn't really use it in raids because if you find yourself in a situation where you really want to heal single target people, why don't you just spec Holy at that point? Because the spec just does that much better. Shadow Covenant is a very misleading spell. It doesn't do anywhere near the amount of healing that it shows up on like logs and add-ons and everything, because this healing absorb part at the end of it is not counted by anything. So if you see someone with super high HPS numbers and they're using Shadow Covenant, that's actually kind of a lie. They didn't really do that much healing. It's just kind of a trick. Just don't use Shadow Covenant. It's really bad. The ability itself is kind of okay-ish, but if you look up at the top here, replaces Power Word Radiance. So we lose the only ability to put Atonement on multiple people at a time to get an ability that's like a bad Prayer of Healing. That doesn't. That's a really bad trade-off. So just don't use Shadow Covenant, please. Moving on to some stats. You can see right here in my character pane kind of what stat priority is like. Haste is basically king for Disc. Getting more atonements out in a smaller amount of time lets you fit in more damage spells, which then makes those atonements and the damage spells both more efficient. So it doesn't actually make you spend more mana unless you decide to spend more mana. But even if you do spend more mana, then it'll just be much more efficient than the other stats. There's a lot of weird math stuff behind it. But also it makes stuff like the dot just better. It makes Power Shield have a lower cooldown. Haste is just pretty good. After that, Mastery is not so good. Mastery doesn't really do any damage, so we kind of prefer Crit. Mastery and Crit now they'll increase your healing by about the same amount. The only problem is that Mastery doesn't really do anything in 5-mans, where you want to be using Shadow Mend a lot. And also it doesn't increase damage, which makes it not quite so good in raids, where that's a big reason of bringing a Disc Priest is the extra damage you bring. So after Haste, we mostly just want Crit. And then after that, Versatility and Mastery, it's kind of whatever. Neither one of them is much worse than the other stats, but you want to avoid them if you can, and get the other stats if you can do that. Okay, so last thing we're going to go over in this particular video, find the right thing, is our legendaries. You will randomly get these legendaries. They're doing different stuff in Legion. But if you do happen to have different legendaries, you kind of want to know which one you want to use. Alright, so we have this necklace. Gives a shield if you haven't taken damage for a little while. 15% of your max health. Oh, they actually nerfed that. It used to be 25%. So it's pretty good. Not quite as good as it used to be, but yeah, it'll provide some extra healing. It'll keep you a little safe. Yeah, it's a solid legendary. This chest piece, Plea, increases the haste by 1% for each target with Atonement for 5 seconds. If you remember the previous video, Plea costs a ton of mana if you have Atonement on more than a few targets, so you can't really get much haste out of this at all, nor do you really want to be casting Plea any 5 seconds, so it's not very good. Like, on average, it'll give you like 3 or 4% haste, but that's not, that's not great. It's okay, but when you're using this, you don't really want to think about this effect at all. Like, don't use Plea in an inefficient manner just to get like a 5% haste buff. That's not good. You just play normally, and if you get the bonus, you get the bonus. Otherwise, you don't. And that's the whole deal with this chest piece. We have these bracers. Power Word Shield reduces a cooldown and pain suppression. It just makes your pain suppression have around like 2.5 2-minute cooldown. It's fine. You have these gloves. The gloves, they'll extend the duration of Atonement on you when you use Penance, which is nice. It gives you a bit more extra Atonement uptime. It's not really that great, though. It's an okay effect, but it's not anything particularly spectacular. We have these boots. They have a proc chance that make it so that occasionally you'll get a proc, and then you can cast time spells while moving. So like Power Word Radiance, something like that. Because it's a random proc, it's not very reliable. But I mean, it's okay. Like, if you need to use Shadow Mend, or need to use Radiance, or need to use Halo, I guess. Even a Smite or something is nice. They're slightly helpful. It's not great. It's kind of the running trend with Disc Legendaries, is that they're okay, but not good. We have Cepha's Secret, which is basically useless. You have to successfully apply a crowd control effect to an enemy to get this proc, which isn't going to happen in almost any content. And if it does happen, you'd basically have to use Psychic Scream only, which, good luck Psychic Screaming people for 4,800 mana, and yeah, this ring is pretty bad. So we're going to talk about the two that are actually good. We have Nero, Band of Promises. Is basically when barrier is up, everyone under barrier will get atonement healed by your penance. That's a lot of healing under barrier. So it makes basically it just makes barrier a lot better. It's really nice. It's a pretty sizable amount of healing. Maybe 3 or 4% healing increase by having this ring. Its only drawback is that it has mastery on it, which kind of makes me sad, but that's fine. And then we have Court of Maiev, which is probably the most interesting legendary. It's not always the most powerful, because Mixed Smite have a chance to reset the cooldown on Penance, which doesn't actually save you any mana. Unlike every other effect, it doesn't give you more healing for your mana, but it does increase your burst healing, or it can at least. So it's kind of nice for that. It's something to play around with. It gives you a ton more damage as well. So it's not always the best in every circumstances. Like longer fights where mana is at a premium, it's not great. But if you're really looking for damage, or if you're at short fights, it's really good. Actually, by far the best legendary in that circumstance. So that's all for the legendaries for now. In the next video, we're going to talk about some healing patterns, and we'll get into more of the cooldowns and some of the other abilities we didn't touch on in the first video. Yeah, see you in that one.